Well, now something's coming on too strong, and I just can't seem to get along. I always try to write a song, but sometimes the words ain't coming out right. Just my niece has left tonight. But as long as I've got a pipe, let's go.
Hello, Internet, and welcome to yet another exciting episode of You Can't Brew That on Television. We are your hosts. I am the Reverend Ryan Bono.
And I am Kyle, Ice Age Continental Drift LaPointe.
And we are here, as we always are, to help you bridge the gap between beer snob and frat boy. Kyle, what are we drinking tonight?
Tonight we're going to try some Newcastle Winter IPA. It's an interesting beer. You know, it's fun to try something from an old standby brewery that makes their brown. That's something a lot of people really enjoy. I always like that brown.
Yeah.
And, you know, try something different that they've come up with.
I'm glad you bring that up because most people actually do know Newcastle for their classic brown ale, which, despite the fact that it's only about 90 years old, really stands among a lot of your older beers as an icon, really.
Sure.
I mean, does that beer not just define the English brown style?
Yeah, you know, it's nut brown ale, man. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that you're right. It's one of those beers that stands the test of time as far as being iconic. And it's not been a long test of time, which is an odd thing. But, you know, I mean...
When I say only about 90 years, but the brewers who founded it came from a brewing tradition. They came from the Scottish and Newcastle Brewery, which had been founded in the early 1700s before this country existed. So, you know, it's still an old brewing tradition, but an iconic beer nonetheless, despite its relatively young age.
Yeah.
So, smelling this, a little bit of earthiness in there, a little...
Yeah, it smells a little fugglish.
Yeah,
which I'm never going to argue with.
I'm never going to argue with Fuggles. Fuggles is a wonderful hop.
We're big proponents of Fuggles, which is it's one of those weird hops that gets a bad rap in my book. But you know, we always talk about Fuggles, and it's a very interesting hop. It's a very earthy, dirty hop. You put it in a beer, and everybody's like, "Oh, I hate Fuggles. I hate the way it tastes." And then you give them a beer, and you don't tell them it has Fuggles in it, and they're like, "This is really good. What did you do different than everybody else? Why is yours so much better?" Oh, you put Fuggles in it. Oh, I hate this beer. back to Circle One, like GoDaddy says.
They're brewing this as an English IPA brewed in the old tradition from the 18th century, and I'm enjoying this.
It's not a bad beer. It's not overly complex.
Yeah,
it's
pretty simple.
Basically it's a beefed up bitter. With a little more hop character, not excessive in the aroma. There's a lot more in the flavor, but you know it's there.
And I'm glad you bring that up because I was going to say that it really is a nice color, isn't it? I was going to say that this really is like the traditional. You walk into an English pub and you order the sweet or the bitter, and that's what this makes me think of is I would call this a bitter before I would call it an IPA.
Yeah, it's much closer to the English bitter style than an English IPA.
Yeah, it's an imperial bitter. I don't know. Like I don't know what I would.
It's only a 5.2, so it falls in the bitter range.
Yeah,
I would think that even at that point, it may be outside the English IPA style or at the very, very, very bottom of the IPA style.
Now they're billing this as their winter release. So this is their winter seasonal. And to me, I'm drinking this, and this just has the feel to me of more of a spring beer. I don't know about you. I know spring is generally reserved for box, but over the last few years, it's really, here in the last decade or so, it's really changed. You see a lot more diversity in the spring selections. This feels like a spring beer to me. I don't think it's big enough to be a winter beer, but...
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Everybody's different.
Well, and one thing I'd like to point out on it is, you know, you look at like Shiner, right? They've had the Shiner Blonde, the Shiner Light, the Shiner Texas. The
Shiner everything now.
It's all been the same recipe of their lightened up
exactly.
American light lager. So is this maybe that? Did they make a winter IPA, quote unquote, because everybody in America wants to have something with the season on it and something of an IPA? They're like, the Americans will buy this.
Exactly. Americans will buy anything if we put Newcastle on it.
And we put it's their Newcastle bitter.
It does taste like the malt bill is similar, maybe slightly altered from just the original Newcastle. Yep. I mean, this malt bill tastes an awful lot like just the Newcastle brown ale to me.
It's nutty, but it doesn't have any of the roastedness. It doesn't have any of the...
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, there isn't any... There's a light chocolate in your traditional Newcastle
And
brown.
there's not
That's
here.
not here.
It's replaced by more of a darker caramel.
Right.
But yeah, it's good. It's not bad.
So let's move on to tonight's beer topic. Because Sunday we had the awards banquet for the Iron Mash. And you've heard us talk a lot about the Iron Mash.
Wonderful.
In the past. It's a lot of fun, really neat competition. And I want to talk about specialty beer.
Yeah.
Because we tasted a specialty here last month. We had the Buffalo Bills Oatmeal Stout.
That was fun.
Which we enjoyed.
Yeah, it's good beer.
Very good beer.
Would not have won Blue Bonnet.
Would not have won Blue Bonnet.
No.
But that doesn't make it not enjoyable. And that particular beer had blueberries mixed into an oatmeal stout. Which we discussed. And we said that was a good pairing. That particular beer style meshed well with the special ingredient that they had selected.
Right.
So I want to talk a little bit about this and why it's important and why quantity is important. Because we tasted some phenomenal beers while we were judging for the Iron Mash.
Right. That
we couldn't push. And let's look at why that happens.
Sure.
And without picking on any particular beer. In fact, let's grab some commercial examples. Pyramid has their apricot. Pyramid Apricot Ale. That is a classic American fruit beer.
Yeah, GABF, that line for that beer will be 5 miles long.
And
every girl in the entire building will be standing in that line to get Pyramid Apricot.
So the Faz loves it.
Sure.
Big
that makes
fan.
sense.
Big fan. Inside joke.
So
why? Let's look at the beer style that's behind the Pyramid Apricot.
Okay.
What do you think that is? Is it just like an American lager, maybe? Or no, I guess it's an ale.
I believe it's an ale.
But
I would say it's probably a blonde.
Yeah, it's a blonde ale, probably.
Nondescript beer.
Light character.
Right.
Very, very smooth, very mellow.
Not overly hoppy.
And you're pairing that with a very mellow fruit flavor.
It's a mellow flavor, but it's also a pungent flavor.
It is?
It's not, but it's hard to get in there. It's like a peach, right? I mean, a peach is very prominent flavor, and it's got some tartness to it, but it's really hard to detect that when you mix it with yeast that will eat most of those sugars, because it also eats most of the flavor. So apricot has that same problem, is that it's hard to get that flavor into a beer. So when you do it, you're generally going to want to do it on to a scale that is a lighter beer, and to a scale that the flavor can be matched well with that beer. So you don't want to go overboard with the beer, or else it's going to overpower the apricot. And if the apricot can overpower the beer, then there's no beer. Because it's going to take quite a bit.
And so that's what we're looking at, is we're looking at beer and ingredient and harmony. And I want to say that in Pyramid's particular case, I think that the apricot is a little too strong. Maybe that's just maybe that's because I don't like apricot. I don't know.
Sure.
Magic Hat number 9 has the same problem, I think. But those are complementary flavors. The flavor of the apricot matches the flavor of that blonde ale that's behind it.
Right.
And it what turns out, even though it's not something I particularly enjoy, it is a good product with complementary flavors.
Right. It still tastes like a beer, because we had a beer that we judged here for, we actually did it in person, right? No. This was actually at just a master brewer that I did. I thought it was with you. It was a different group. But we did one that was somebody had put together a raspberry tart, is what they called it, something along those lines. Well, it was a wheat base with raspberry, but the raspberry was so overpowering you couldn't tell it was a beer. It was very tasty. But it tasted like a malt beverage at that point. You really couldn't tell that it was a beer. There was nothing to compare the beer flavors to. You didn't go, wow, I catch some malt here. You just caught like a alcoholic fruit drink.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what you're not going for, is that experience of one flavor overpowering the other. And I think that along with there's some people that lean towards the frat boy beers. I would call them the redneck beer drinkers that we don't even discuss typically. But fruit beers get a really bad rap in certain circles. And I think that's undeserved. Because especially we, drinking beer, enjoying beer, we talk about pairing our beers with food. And why not have that food just dropped right into the bottle itself?
Yeah, I think they did that in some of those Buffalo Wild Wing commercials, right? Where the guy had the bratwurst beer.
Oh, yeah, the bratwurst beer.
Looked very tasty.
That commercial was hilarious.
I love the ruckus that it caused amongst the beer world.
Yeah.
It's quite funny.
Yeah, for those of you not in the home brewer community, that particular commercial caused quite a fuss among those of us that are easily offended, which obviously is not the two of us.
Right, we both got a kick out of it.
I thought it was really funny.
I showed Bono the commercial followed by the 50 posts on our message board on Cap and Hair that were, most every other one of those at least was just hating on Buffalo Wild Wings. Hey man, that's their advertising.
Yeah, I thought it was funny.
Who's going to go in there and buy all of their fire sale $3 Bud Lights? It's not going to be the homebrewers. So, and who's going to go in there and buy their $6 Guinnesses? It's like, well, they're not going to offend those people either by telling them that home brewing's bad.
Yeah, when you offend homebrewers, A, you're only going to offend the ones that are easily offended, and B, it's still a really small group, so it's a group you can afford to piss off.
Yeah, and the other thing about it is it's kind of like the Walmart crowd. You can call everybody who shops at Walmart like redneck and cheap and yada yada yada.
Still gonna go.
As a Walmart commercial. That could be your commercial. Hey, you cheap asses! Come on out to Walmart! Buy our cheap shit!
Absolutely.
You are really cheap and worthless. Come on, but we got it real cheap. And people would show up in droves.
You won't find any lower prices, you cheap, worthless piece of junk. Come on to our store.
So basically you got the same thing there. I mean, you offend a bunch of homebrewers, but if they're parched and driving by a Buffalo Wild Wings, they'll be like,
they'll still drop it.
I'm going to pull in. It's happy hour. I'm going to have a couple pints. So
let's move on to some less heavy topics, because talking about specialty beers and flavors, it's it's fun. We like it, but we're not going to do that to you for 30 minutes. So let's talk about traveling. We've got a couple of traveling stories for you tonight. The first one comes to us from Ostwald, Germany.
Sure.
Where, and I'm going to kind of read this, kind of paraphrase off of an article I found on the internet. Beer lovers will think that they've died and gone to heaven because they can lay their heads to rest in a bed carved out of a 19th century historic beer barrel at the Land Hotel Beverland. Oh, you looked like you were about to say something, so I thought I'd let you go.
I was just amazed. I mean, because if you see the picture on here, and this is a BusinessInsider.com article, we'll post this stuff up later, but if you see the picture on there, I mean, it's like a full-size freaking king bed inside this barrel. That's a big barrel of beer.
It is a massive bed, and what happened was that these are from the Potts Brewery, which is right there in that little town in Germany, and they stopped using them in the mid-'90s, and the beer barrels were just sort of sitting around until some genius hotel owner decided to capitalize on the massive interest in beer here over the last 2 years.
Because nobody wanted to brew like 8,000 gallons of Lambic.
Yeah, I mean, these are massive barrels. But here's the problem. Like, here's where you run into an issue. Each bedroom sleeps 4 people, but there's only one beer barrel bed in each room, so there's
not a lot of sleeping going on.
Yeah, there's going to be a big fight, I think, or we'll just all have to get separate. Yeah, I think that's another nice ploy by the hotel, because no group of 4 is going to want to split one room because they're going to end up in a fight, so they'll just get 2 rooms.
I think that nature has a way of separating others from my bed.
Oh, yeah, I believe that is the case. And also, in true old world Bavarian style, each room has a 32-inch flat-screen TV and a DVD player. So, if you
those
really...
also were part of the Potts Brewery,
yes, also
left over from 1900 brewing operations.
The monks who started the Potts Brewery were very advanced, and they loved watching television.
Right.
True story.
But only television they made because they're austere people.
So, since Rich didn't help us plan tonight's show, we're gonna veer away from the world of beer entirely right now. Kyle, you dug up this story, so why don't you intro it?
This is one of my favorite things now. Much akin to Bono and his child crying at the end of a football game.
Oh wow!
That
he loves
it. He loves
Absolutely
it.
love it.
He waits for that moment.
No, it's grown men crying.
That's your
like that. That really, but the child is that's like the cherry on top.
Right.
Of the
That's
cake,
okay. You expect it,
right.
But you really would like the grown adult male,
especially if he's wearing something stupid like the OU kid who had the shark helmet hat.
Uh-huh.
He had like a styrofoam shark on his head, and he was crying. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, guy.
So this is my favorite story. And this popped up here on a Yahoo News Flash. This is my favorite type of thing. I will read this every time it comes through. I'm a sucker for GPS stories. When somebody follows their GPS to some wayward destination that has nothing to do with the destination that they're actually intending to go to. This lady is from Belgium, which is great beer. That's how we parallel.
That is where the connection is, Producer Rich.
All out.
The producer only lets us do beer stories, so...
She had to stop for gas twice. Didn't realize she had gone further than 90 miles until the second day of her trip. As she reached mile 900...
What sex is this driver? Is this a male driver or a female driver?
This is like mid-60s female driver. And she managed to drive 900 miles and reach Croatia before she realized that all the street signs were in a language that she was not familiar with. And so she realized she had gone too far. And I don't know, like, if she immediately called the newspaper to ask them for directions. Like, how did this story come out?
That's a really good question. She, like, tweeted it to Croatian Daily. At Croatian Daily, WTF am I?
But just the whole premise behind this, and you read these stories like couples stranded in Utah mountains because they were following their GPS in a big circle. Like, nobody understands that maybe if you're in middle of nowhere Utah where no satellites are pointed because there's no people, that maybe your GPS isn't working perfectly.
I think that's what happened to the Donner Party, actually.
When they were lost up in the mountains, huh?
If they had just followed directions instead of their GPS, they wouldn't have had to eat each other.
Well, I heard that they had actually gotten directions from Utah himself prior to going there, and that was the problem. Captain
sucks at directions himself, who delivered pizza for 8 years of his life somehow.
By a Roma.
I have a fun GPS story that I want to share with everybody.
Okay.
Because GPS really does make people stupid. Just dumb. Really, really dumb. And I'm going to change names here to protect the guilty. Because they are guilty.
We'll call him Mono.
A guy named Mono.
And Lyle.
Was driving cross country with his friend Homie Tullingsworth. And they stopped for gas. Right, and Mono was ready to get back on the highway, but Homie Tullingsworth wanted to wait until the GPS
he
wanted to wait until the GPS told him how to get back onto the highway, and despite all of Bono's I'm done.
Mono. Despite all of
Bono's protests, that we can see the highway from the parking lot we were sitting in, Tommy still wanted to wait for the GPS to come on and the gentle lady voice to tell him how to get to the highway.
I adjusted when we had a GPS that I got for Christmas, and it was one of those like, oh, we thought you'd love this. I ended up giving it to my wife. It was like a gift just for me. I appreciated the thought behind the gift, but I like to know where I'm going before I go, because it's kind of one of those deals where I feel like maybe if I get into a situation where that thing stops working or anything goes on, I've been driving long enough and navigating off of maps, I'm pretty sure I can get where I'm going. Well, I changed that thing and dialed it back and changed the voice on it to where it was some English lady with like the lowest, slowest, drawn-out voice you could possibly get. So it really felt like I had some mentally deficient English lady giving me directions. So no matter how poor they were, I was all right with that, because it'd be like,
was it Amy Winehouse? Was she drunk?
Well, I heard she didn't really die of alcohol poisoning because the person that took her like 0.34 blood alcohol content wasn't certified to do so, so it must have been incorrect.
Oh, okay.
So I think they're going to dig her up and test it again to see if it was
Something tells me the alcohol's left her bloodstream by now. You never know. My wife's, going back to GPS, my wife's GPS actually has Snoop Doggy Dogg telling you how to get from point A to point B.
No diggity?
Awesome.
It is really cool. My favorite thing that he says is like if you exit the highway and you have to go straight onto the frontage road, he says, go straight on through, just like a playa do.
I've always wanted to have the wife GPS that would basically give you directions. So like you go, okay, turn right 500 feet ago. You know, it's like...
You see that back there?
All right, I think that we're getting a little bit silly here.
That's all right. So
it's time to open another beer. And while we're opening another beer, Kyle, why don't you tell everybody what we learned tonight?
well, we learned fun stories about GPS, and that took us all the way to Germany.
And
In Germany, what did we learn? What did we learn?
oh, in Germany, we learned that. Sorry, guys, this is getting a bit silly. In Germany, we learned that you can sleep in a beer barrel.
And then we also learned about the Iron Mash. It was a good event this year, and some interesting
Yep.
facts about specialty beers.
Specialty beer, harmony of special ingredient in beer,
And sometimes non-harmony.
and sometimes non-harmony.
Right.
And we found out that Newcastle makes a fairly tasty IPA.
Ish bitter.
Ish bitter, yeah. So, while we continue to ish our bitter, we want you to keep in mind that we are not professionals.
So please try this at home.
There's one thing I've said, though I'm not known to be wise. When I hear someone crying out, lamenting, I just look them straight in the eyes and say,
Oh god, that is awful.
oh, you're not the only one who ever came up from nothing, Lord, and you're not the